Welcome to the Ardan Labs podcast. Our special guest today is Julien Cretel. Julien, I cannot believe I finally got you on this show, man. You know, you're on my timeline, and I've been wanting to talk to you like forever, and we finally found a time to do that, man. This is awesome.
That's great. Thanks for inviting me. We actually met before. We were on a panel at GopherCon Europe last year.
I remember.
But
Yeah.
we only had a brief encounter, I think. Yeah, it's very busy, those conferences. But yeah, that was great. Actually, I'd like to take this opportunity. I don't think I had the opportunity to thank you last year, but thanks for everything you've done for the community. I remember when I got into Go in Action, your Ultimate Go course were great resources for learning the language. So thank you.
Oh man, I appreciate that. No, and I do remember there were 4 of us up there doing that panel. I like those panels. I like the impromptu stuff because then I don't feel guilty for not preparing.
Yeah, it's all off
That's
the cuff,
horrible,
isn't
right?
it?
Yeah, man. It's like super easy. Like I tell most of these conferences, I'll be a backup in case like something happens because like there's no stress in that, man.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was
Are you gonna be
fun.
Are you gonna be at a GCEU?
No, I'm afraid not this year. I've got family commitments. I won't be able to attend this year. Maybe next year.
That's fair. There's 3 conferences I won't miss every year: the USA one, the London one, and the Berlin one. And I kind of get business out of those 3, so it's easy to justify it. I didn't do the Italian, and the Singapore is this week, actually, the week of January 21st here. So obviously I'm not there.
There's so many of them now. There's an Australian one. There's an Israel one. There was one in Greece last year, I think.
I did that one because that was like a GopherCon EU special.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to do Israel, but obviously you can't really fly over there. Mickey runs that one, so I've been wanting to do that with him. Do that for him, I should say. The only one I haven't been to that I'm that's kind of on my list is the Brazil one. And then there was one in Russia for a little while.
Yeah, I do remember that.
And I didn't go. But do you know? Actually, I'm gonna ask Julien here on our show here. Do you know anything about FOSDEM? Do you know if Go has a room at FOSDEM this year?
So I was hoping to go this year. I know that Tanguy Herman, who you know, is going. So there must be some Go activity over there. I'll ask him again. I don't know the answer to this question exactly, to be honest.
But I should ask Tanguy, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay. You know, I was talking to him yesterday, actually. So I'll I don't know. I don't have tickets or anything, but I was thinking if we didn't have the kids, I was going to sneak into... There's nothing else to do in Brussels, man. Brussels is pretty boring, right?
I know. It's too big of a city for me. I like small cities, and I don't know, Brussels, like there's too much... it's too busy for me with the EU and all that stuff. I'm on one extreme and you're on the other, maybe. I'm not sure.
All right, forget about it. This podcast, nothing about that, but this is what happens when I go on these sidetracks here. Joe, this podcast is about you and sort of your journey through tech. I'm really interested in hearing that. But before we start, there's a couple of little questions. One is I'd like to get a general sense of what year it was when people were finishing grade school and sort of where were they living at the time. So without going into any other detail, what year was it when I'm going to call it high school for lack of a better word for Europe, but when did you graduate, like high school, and what year was that?
So the year is easier, I guess. It was, I think, in Y2K, I think, year 2000, I think, maybe 2001 or something. And it was in the Loire Valley.
Where's that?
Where's that? So it's like, maybe you've heard of a wine producing town called Sancerre. Sancerre.
What country is it? Is this France?
France. Yeah, France.
Okay. Dude, we got to remember I'm an American. They don't teach us geography.
And to be honest, my knowledge of American geography is probably as good as your knowledge of French geography. So
So no just problem. give me north, south, east, west.
It's
France.
Pretty much bang in the middle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, sweet. So you were in France. Okay, perfect. Like 2001. So that puts you at like 17,
Yeah,
16,
17, 18,
17,
something
18.
like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Perfect. Okay. Next question. Clear your mind. Don't think too hard. First thought that comes into your head of you working on a computer, no matter
Okay.
what the age was. Just first thought.
Working or playing?
Could be both. Could be both. That first memory you have of being on a computer.
Right. So that again, that's an easy answer. My dad worked for the local city council, and we always had computers at home because he was in charge of IT over there. And my first memory of being on a computer was probably playing Prince of Persia, probably sometimes around the release of the game, so late 80s, on a Toshiba T3200, I believe. So
Whoa.
it was one of
Whoa.
those huge, like 6 kg portable computers, air quote. And the display was orange and black. That's what I remember best. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I had my first computer, real computer, like a CPM OS based K Pro 2 back in like maybe 86. When I went to uni and went away to school in 1988, I was the only person with a computer in their room in this college that was known for like computer science. So having a computer in your room that early, right, in the late 80s or whatever, that's like a real privilege. Like that's wild, you know. They were super expensive.
Yeah, that must have given you an edge over the others.
You know what it did? It I'm going to tell you this bad story. I'm going to tell you two really short. And basically, nobody wanted to go to the computer lab to write their papers, so they all came into my room to write all their papers. I had like 3 years worth of papers for every class in that university, and let's just say every once in a while I had to borrow one because I didn't write. I didn't write it myself. So you can't get away with that anymore, you know.
The cat is out of the bag. They might catch you now.
It's
Might
too
go
late.
after
I'm
you.
grandfathered in my degree. It's too late. It's too late. Plus, I'm not going to tell you what class and what paper. Is that wild though? Like you can't. I mean, obviously you can't do that anymore with all the tooling that they have for plagiarism and stuff. But
Yeah.
I it was amazing. I literally had 3 years of like on floppy disks of papers and stuff from people. So that maybe that was the advantage.
Well, maybe that qualifies as hacking in a way. Uh,
Yeah.
no harm done.
So what was your dad was in charge of IT at a time where like that was kind of a new sort of job market at that point. I guess for the minis, right? Unless he must have been working on big sort of mainframes too before that.
So the town in question is quite small. It wasn't anything crazy, but he had computers. Like his workplace would provide him with computers, and we would get updates, updated models and stuff. He wasn't that much into programming himself, but he would provide me with computers pretty much.
Is your dad still alive today? Is he still working like that today?
Yeah, he's retired now. He's still into computers, but yeah, yeah,
Yeah, he got to really see the vast change in that tech because his hands were all over it. Yeah, that's wild. What
yeah.
about your mom? Is your mom what would your mom do? Did she work? Was she home?
She was a nurse,
Nice,
so nothing
nice,
to do with
nice.
computers.
Except they got computers there too, right? I mean, they're black box machines. You know, I almost had an opportunity to work in that field. I applied for a job early on, was a C++ job to work on those medical devices. I'm kind of
Nice.
glad I didn't get that job though. I was so nervous. They must have seen it because I was young. I mean, you got somebody's literally directly have somebody's life in your hands on a machine like that, you know?
Yeah, that's scary, especially like over the last few years. You've heard of so many hospitals getting hacked. I'd say the level of security in the average hospital, regardless of geography, is pretty poor.
The second job I had in the mid '90s was with a healthcare company. They were a hospice, like 5,000 patient hospice, and I hated going to some of the facilities. I just, you're like 26 years old. I don't want to, you don't want to, everything becomes a number. At least in my head at 26, I was so immature. I needed to keep things at numbers, right? Because it was a crazy thing for me. But I was writing I wrote a piece of software that failed. And somebody didn't get oxygen one weekend and somebody like passed away, so like I've experienced some of that early on in my career and just didn't want to. And I teach today, like it's almost impossible not to be affecting somebody's healthcare, whether it's physical or mental at this point in anything you do, right? Like you got to take responsibility. But I had like a couple of those experiences that were, dude, I had experiences where I was trying to get some software to work and the idea of tests in the mid 90s just didn't exist, right? Like that thought. And so I needed live data to test some stuff. And I'm like waiting for people to die to test certain features of what I'm trying to do against the census, And I'm like, Bill, what are you doing? Like, what? Like, stop. It was crazy for me. I was almost glad when I left.
That's pretty grim. But you're right about responsibility. There's this guy, Kevlin Henney. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's fond of asking, how long do you think, it would take for the world to collapse without software? Let's say all software stops functioning. And people go, I don't know, maybe a month. And his typical response is like 24 hours.
At worst case, 24 hours. I
Yeah.
think it starts to break down within 2 hours.
Probably,
Easily a couple of hours. I mean, even if you even my daughter's a nurse, okay, and she's worked in some hospitals that are high-end tech. She didn't do a lot, and she's worked in some hospitals that are really low-end tech where they really got to be more hands-on, So I feel like those hospitals are probably okay, but how many people do you have personnel-wise that are used to the machine doing everything and not you doing much more than, right? So man, that's a great question, actually. That is a super interesting question. I might use that in one of my classes. Man, that's a great question.
It isn't mine. Full credit to Kevlin Henney.
Kevin Henney. I'm going to write that down. Kevin Henney. That's cool. All right. So tell me what Julien was like in those like high school days, those time you're like 15 through 18, those 4 years where you're trying to figure out who you are.
Well, you said you were immature at 26. I was probably as immature as you were at that age. Didn't really know what I wanted to do. I went to maths and science almost by default because that's what I was best at, but I wasn't that interested. I was a good student without really trying in high school at least. And then I went on to classe préparatoire. I think you've had French people on the show before, but it's like those 2 intensive years of maths and physics, and they really put you through the ringer. They really...
is that high school or is that after high school?
It's like after high school. It's like...
Okay, but don't talk to me about that just yet.
Okay.
Because I'm also kind of curious, like what people are doing outside of class. Because
okay.
I was like you. I wasn't a good student. I was immature. I would say more than I can look back on it now and realize that I was just ridiculously immature. I don't think it was my brain as much as that. And so I hated homework. I hated all that stuff, right? So I was into sports, man. I played baseball and ran track. Like, what were you doing outside of the classroom?
Okay, yeah. So my main activity outside of school and outside of home was swimming. I was a competitive swimmer. I was
Nice.
never really that good, but you spend a lot of time in the swimming pool, and it's not really an activity through which you can communicate with your teammates. You're spending a lot of time alone in your head. So maybe that's why my tendency for introspection comes from. I don't know.
Really? I mean, that I've never heard of. I've met swimmers before. They've never expressed this idea that it was a lonely sport like that.
I don't know. I guess everybody's experience is different, but that's That's how I felt it at the time.
That's, you know, my roommate in college was a swimmer. Yeah. He had, I tell you, man, that swimming body is amazing, dude. You must have been ripped, dude.
That
I
was
mean,
a
it
long
must have
time
been.
ago, though.
I was gonna go into swimming just to like get in shape, man. But I'm not a good swimmer. Like
it's, it's not
I
too
could
late, Bill.
tread water, but you know what it is now at 55. My shoulders just don't want to rotate like without screaming at me anymore. I'm not afraid to get in the water, but like drowning is like like you have a fear of things, right? Like drowning is a fear. Like I can't watch a movie where somebody's drowning. Like I have to fast forward it. And I don't know where that comes from because I've never drowned before. You know, I could tread water and swim. But I think as I get older, I have less inclination to get into a swimming pool and it's like weird stuff. Maybe I need to go to therapy and have somebody like what do they call that when they put you in a trance? The whatever it is. I forgot what they do and they make you go into like a sleep state and get all this stuff out of you. It'd be interesting to know where that my
Hypnosis.
fear hypnosis, right? Like I don't know where that fear of drowning comes from, but I don't know, man. It's crazy.
Yeah, it feels like you need to exercise it. Because I think swimming might do wonders to your shoulders, actually.
Oh man, I don't know, dude. Like even when I was even 15 years younger, throwing a baseball with my son would like it's just your body, dude, right? Like if you don't use it, you lose it. And for sure, I'm not using it as much as I. My wife tells me all the time she wants me to exercise more, right? Doctors telling you exercise more, and it sounds good on paper.
Because you work too much, Bill.
I do tell her I do walk the dog every day. She's like, it's not enough. It's not enough. That's great, dude. So the swimming, you weren't like you didn't feel like you were at a level where that could have went beyond sort of high school.
Nah, I mean, I was okay, but I had friends that were much better than I was. And I wasn't that consistent with my training. I would skip some of the training as well. So it was good to stay in shape, as you said, but it wasn't really a passion. It was, just something to do.
Yeah, you know, I was a track runner and I was good, but then there's always that person that's really good, right? You always have one or two people on the team that just make you realize that you're not going to take this to any next level. But for everybody else in high school, I was fast, right? I imagine it's almost something similar to that, right? It's like,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
But at the same time, like, you should be content with not being the best at whatever you're into. Like, is not being the best at guitar a good reason not to pick up playing the guitar, for example? I don't think so. Just do it if you enjoy it. You don't have to, you know, be the best at everything.
I know, but asking a 17-year-old to have that level of maturity is kind of tough, right? I watch reality dating shows, and at 55, I see all the mistakes they're making, right? But I have to tell my wife, like, baby, when you were their age, when you were 25, you weren't that emotionally mature. You weren't that experienced. You'd be making the same mistakes, right?
I agree.
I think you're right. And I'm trying to think back when I was in high school now running track, I think there were times where I was upset that I couldn't compete at the same level as other people. And I was small, dude. I was like in high school, I think I was still sub 5 feet. I'm 5'8" now, which isn't huge, and I think I always blamed my height on a lot of that.
It's
Height,
funny you mentioned height because I had a friend who was quite short and he was the fastest in our class.
Wow. I don't know how that, like, I know in track for the long distances that I was running, I did the mile, the 1600 meters and the 3200 meter races. Um, the guys that were much taller than me were beating me like by real numbers. Like I always felt like my legs had to move twice as fast as those guys to cover the same distance. Is that not the same in swimming?
Yeah, I mean, usually tall guys are the fastest, yeah. They usually have the biggest feet and hands as well, so that does help. Yeah, you're right.
So you're going to graduate high school now. You're out of all the subjects, the maths and the science is still sort of your best topic. So you go and decide what to do the 2 years of that intensive sort of study. Was there really a choice beyond doing that?
Well, I guess my parents were pushing me to do that, but that was only by elimination. Nothing else tempted me really. So I did that. I went to Paris, did the 2 years, repeated 1 year, and that's really tough. I mean, you really have no time to rest. You have to study all the time. I remember I had so little time for myself that they would give you a slew of exercises to do for the next day. I would take my exercises and stick them on the wall of the shower and think about the exercises as I was showering.
Did you have to apply for that, or was it guaranteed that you get in?
No, it's not guaranteed. It's a bit competitive, but it's all right. If you have good grades in high school, you can get in. It's fine.
I mean, so you earned it. It wasn't like you earned getting into that program for sure.
I suppose, yeah, but at the same time, my parents were really supportive, and yeah, I mean, I don't think I owe it to any merit or anything. It's just, it's all right.
I,
Yeah.
I, I I don't know the rest of your story yet, but I want to ask you this question. If you could write a letter to your 17-year-old self right now, what would you tell, just for that decision, what would you tell your 17-year-old self just for that one decision?
To go to those 2 years of intensive studies, is that it?
Yeah, like would you recommend to just do it, stick it out and work harder, or would you recommend your 17-year-old self to do something else?
So I've thought about this many times actually, and I think I would definitely say do it again, but I would explain to my younger self why it's worth it, and I would try to convey motivation for pursuing that avenue of studies. I think at the
How
time,
would you how would you motivate? I mean, I interrupt people all the time because something pops in my head, but you know you know who you were at 17. At 17-year-old's hard to motivate. Like
true.
what is the button you would have to press to get your 17-year-old self to listen?
Well, meeting your older self should count for something, right? I mean, I don't know if there's some time travel machine in your scenario, but that should count for something.
Huh. Now you made me just think. If I forget even meeting, right? I know I have a letter from my older self in front of me. You're right. That should be enough motivation to listen. You know what? You're right. You're right. You're right. You're right. So you would tell yourself to go do that, continue down that same path.
Yeah,
Right.
definitely. Just power through it. It's gonna be tough, but just power through it because it's worth it. You learn so much, and then you know, even now, like on my Go projects, I'm sure we'll talk about that a bit more later. But I'm using stuff that I actually learned, 20 years ago. So it's all paying off years later.
See, that's amazing because I would say that what I learned from uni was more about how to think and attack problems that I'm completely clueless about, as opposed to say the tech that I was using at the time.
But
But
I think that's what I meant in terms of maths and algorithms and stuff. I'm working on just this morning. I was working on some algorithm that um, helped me optimize some Go programs. So that would be stuff. Those foundations were laid back in those years. So I'm grateful for that.
do you ever like catch yourself smiling when you are like reaching back in that old toolbox and think like, damn, you know what? Like here it is again, right? Like those couple of years.
It's more like uh, why did I not realize the power of this technique earlier? Why am I only realizing that this is useful for this specific task right now? I should have thought of that.
You're the person, like, when I don't know if you hear it much anymore, but I remember when I was growing up and stuff, people would yell, "I'm never going to use this in the real world. Why are you teaching me this?" Right? But you're like using stuff in the real world that was taught to you at school.
But back in the day, I was probably thinking, when will this ever be useful? You're right. So that's something
So
I could
you
say I could tell my older self.
You are going to use this. But I don't hear the kids today saying that as much as I remember us saying that. It was funny. These are dumb stories, Julian, that pop in my head. Did they teach you how to write in cursive when you were in school?
In primary school, yeah, they did. Yeah, I don't do it anymore.
I have a kid that's in 7th grade, like junior high school, and I was telling her last week how we had to learn how to write in, I call it script, all right, but in cursive. And I don't know why they're not teaching. You need it at least for your signature. The next week, she comes home. She goes, "Did you talk to my teacher? Because she's decided that she's going to teach us script on her own." And I was like, "No, I didn't send any emails." But they started teaching her.
It's a conspiracy.
I know. I feel like it's one of those things where you said something in the phone, and now you're getting, you're getting advertisements. But then she said that was the first time I think I ever heard her say, "We're never going to use this kind of in the real world," right? And then I told her, start practicing your signature.
How old is she?
So she is 13.
All right.
But you're right. We learned it earlier. We learned it in like those first 6 years or something. But they're definitely not teaching it anymore. I think the teacher wanted to teach them for whatever reason, right? It was like extracurricular.
Here at Ardan Labs, we believe in empowering companies to reach their full potential through innovative technology solutions. Trusted by small startups and Fortune 500 companies alike, we specialize in high-performance software consulting, training, staffing, development, and now AI. With over 14 years of experience, Ardan Labs has trained over 30,000 engineers and served over 1,000 companies worldwide. Whether you're mastering Go, Rust, Kubernetes, Terraform, or blockchain, we're your strategic partner for performance-grade solutions. Let's elevate your tech journey together. Reach out to Ardan Labs today.
You do those 2 intense years of maths and physics and all that stuff, and then what happens after that? What's your next decision point? More schooling, or you get to go to work, or how does that work again?
So those 2 years are only meant to prepare you for some engineering school in France. Anyway, that's the plan. So then you apply for those schools, and you have a bunch of exams for each of those schools that you apply to, and based on your results, you get in or you don't. And I went to an engineering school in Marseille, in the south of France, where I spent 3 years, and that was basically engineering. You learn a bit of everything. That's where.
But there's no liberal arts. There's no liberal arts. There's no like philosophy class. This is just heads down, sort of engineering.
There was like the closest thing to philosophy was history of science, epistemology, stuff like that. But it was it's 100% scientific. A bit of management for people who like that, but yeah.
So in the States, this idea of having I'm going to use quotes, air quotes, well-rounded sort of university education, right? And if you get a BA, a bachelor's, you're going to have more of those art classes as opposed to a BS, right? Bachelor's of Science. You take a little less, but you still have them. What are your thoughts on that? Do you feel like you're glad it was just heads down engineering classes, or do you feel there would have been some value in taking a art appreciation class or something? I don't know. Can't remember what all the liberal arts were.
It's difficult to evaluate in retrospect how much I missed arts classes, but I can tell you I was never really good at, visual arts or even music. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure how much I missed out. But I did enjoy the philosophy classes. That was great.
I did too. I enjoyed the philosophy class. I enjoyed an anthropology class for some crazy reason, to the point where I really thought for a half a second that I might want to take more of those classes instead of some other. I didn't do it, but those were classes that I hated going to class. Let me put it that way. Like, it took an act of God for me to show up in a classroom back then. Again, really immature. But I don't think I ever really missed a philosophy or an anthropology class. Like, I was really super interested in those.
Yeah, same. I think I skipped a lot of the boring classes. But yeah, I don't think I missed a lot of the more the philosophy classes. That in a way, it's a good respite from the really technical maths, physics classes. So it's always appreciated.
But it's still like logical, right? Like, even learned how to take language and turn it into truth tables, and I thought that was fascinating. So I think I just felt there was this, especially when I was younger, I think I had more absolutes in my head. Like, things were either black or white a lot more when I was younger. Now I know there's a million shades of gray, right? But I think when I was younger, things were much more black and white. And I felt like for some reason those classes had a lot of that sort of black and whiteness to it. Maybe that's why I enjoyed it. I haven't even thought about it till just now.
Well, it's probably during those classes that you really sharpen your critical mind. That's the way I think about them. In retrospect, I think that's probably what teaches you to think critically.
So how long is that program when you get into it? Is that a 4-year program? It's just another 2 years?
It's like 3 years.
3 years.
Yeah, so you end up with the equivalent of a master's degree. That's it.
Wow. So as you're ending that sort of master's degree, now let me think about what year it is. You graduated like 2001, you did 2 more years. So say 2003, and then you do another 3. So like 2006, you're now finally near the end of sort of school. Are you finally now at a point where you want to get into industry, or you still want to do some more schooling?
So in terms of computers, we had some programming classes. We did a bit of C, a bit of MATLAB, which is horrible. And at that stage, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do.
Still, after all this time, had you been working at all? Internships, work programs?
Yeah, you had to
any of that?
Yeah, you had to do internships during those 3 years, and actually one of them had something to do with programming. It was in an optics lab in Marseille, and I had to program some kind of robot to focus a laser on a target. That was quite interesting. Oh, that was in C++.
That's super cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
A little hardware, that was super interesting, dude. That
was good.
You didn't get hooked into that sort of, because when you can, sorry, go on.
That's probably the first memory of, this programming thing is actually cool. That was the first serious project that I took part in that really got me hooked, I guess. Yeah, you're right.
When you can sort of map this virtual world that we're in, like software to me is really virtual, with this hardware world and beyond just a computer, like the robot thing, I think that's super magical, because if you're trying to teach programming and you don't have a visual component to it, it's really hard for somebody to sort of wrap their head around. But some of this hardware, like what you were doing, gives you that visual component, right? You feel like you're touching the outside world.
Yeah, exactly. You can have an impact, like, at your fingertips is more power than you imagined.
Yeah. So when you're finished with the schooling and the internships, that you didn't have a job with any of these, like, you must have been thinking, I'd love to work here, if you were like into that.
Yeah, but in the meantime, I actually went into marine engineering. So everything to do, like, what you're supposed to do after studying the topic is go into oil and gas, the oil and gas industry. That's what I was destined to do pretty much. But I didn't want to do that.
Why oil
Yeah.
and gas? Was it because of that university you were at?
Yeah.
Or just oil and gas.
Yeah, if you
Oh.
study marine engineering, you're supposed to design all rigs, stuff like that, and that really wasn't what I was interested in. The reason I got into that branch was marine renewable energy. So machines that say convert the power of the waves into electricity. That's the reason I got into that. And when I graduated, I actually looked for an internship in that area, and that took me to Scotland. I spent 6 months in Scotland in a company that doesn't exist anymore, working on that kind of topic.
Working on those problems.
Yeah, exactly.
Ah.
And that was very mathematical in nature as well, so that was very interesting. And then
Moving to Scotland must have been cool though. Like at
Yeah.
that time, you're like, I finally found a gig. I'm gonna move to Scotland, right? Like your parents must have been happy with all that too.
Yeah, it was. The country is beautiful as well. It was in the Highlands near Inverness. Yeah, it was beautiful, and the food is great. The beer, the whiskey.
Yeah.
I had a great time over there.
And you were there for 6 months.
6 months, yeah.
What happened in 6 months? The company didn't fold within those 6 months.
No, I don't think they were in a position to give me a job at that stage. But a friend of mine tipped me off and told me that there was a PhD opening in Ireland, in Cork, the second largest city of Ireland after Dublin. So that's where I went after that internship. I went to Ireland.
To do a PhD. What was the PhD going to be? You hadn't decided yet what the PhD was going to be yet, but you got
No, it was a continuation of the same topic. So marine renewable energy. Yeah.
And now I'm just curious because we'll talk about what your thesis was on, but you said converting the waves into energy. Was that the only option you had? And right, we got a planet filled with, I think I looked it up, how many gallons of water was in. Recently, I looked up how many gallons of water was in the ocean. I don't remember what the number was. Obviously, it was quite large, but I mean, if you could convert all of that into energy, it would be endless for lifetimes, wouldn't it?
You mean convert matter into energy, like Einstein style?
Somehow taking that salt water, right, and leveraging it for energy, you'd have an endless supply.
I don't know about that. Would have to look at the science, I guess. But
Well, I'm not saying you can do it. I'm just saying, like, at a high level, if you could.
Yeah.
I wouldn't know how, right? But if you could, it would be interesting.
Yeah, I don't think we've cracked that nut yet, and I wasn't ambitious enough to try to do that.
So, what was your ideas then around waves and energy?
So the basic idea was to model a machine that kind of acts like an oscillator and gets stimulated by the waves and starts to bop up and down, say, and it drives like a power converter and produces energy. And I guess the difficult part is how much resistance should that power converter apply, and you could model that as an optimization problem. That was the crux of my thesis, I guess. Yeah.
This if you could build this thing, it would have to be deep in the ocean, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, just because you would need a constant movement of the ocean. Yeah, that's kind of cool. So, what was the conclusion that you came to? Is there like a 2-sentence conclusion? I'm assuming you finished your PhD. Did you finish the PhD?
You're assume incorrectly. I did not finish my PhD. I became quite disillusioned halfway through, and I never submitted. But that's all right. There's a happy ending. A happy ending. So
Okay. So now you're working when you're doing this PhD, or is it full time, sort of hedged down?
it was actually very well subsidized, so it was comfortable for the 3 years. But I never submitted.
So then, what happened at the end of this sort of 3 years? I mean, don't you feel guilty at some level that they're funding you for this,
I do.
and now you're not going to submit?
I do. I still do. Sometimes I fantasize about revisiting, my body of notes and submit something. But at the same time, I got a couple of academic papers out of my research, so that should count for something. And I'm not sure I believe in the idea of deploying devices like this. It's very, very complicated. There's a lot of maintenance. It requires a lot of resources. Ironically enough, it requires a lot of oil to deploy and maintain those devices. So I'm not sure it's such a good idea anymore.
And not environmentally safe, not
Exactly.
practical. Yeah, all those things. I mean, it's at some point, if it's costing more to maintain and operate than the energy coming out, you can't do it anyway. Right?
Yeah.
It's not sustainable.
And I think one thing that I became disillusioned with was this never-ending stream of promises. Oh, we're 5 years away from commercialization. We're almost there. Just give us more money, more funding.
But to be fair, if you didn't pursue that, you wouldn't have come to those conclusions. So you'd be still saying, what if? Like, I hate this idea of, like, I don't ever want to be what if. Like, I had a business that failed miserably, but I'm not sitting here wondering what the result of that would have been, right?
Yeah. What is it they say? It's better to regret something you did than something you didn't do.
Yeah. So to me, that's the way I look at that 3 years of work, right? You did enough of it to come to the conclusion that this wasn't something you even wanted to deploy if you could figure it out because of all these other things.
Yeah, and as I said,
That's
there is
fair.
a happy ending because it prepared me for my next move in my career. That's when my interest for computers and programming was rekindled. I guess I was doing a lot of programming, not necessarily with my favorite programming language. I was using MATLAB at the time, but that's what made me think. You know what? Maybe I should give this programming thing another try. And actually, my partner at the time was retraining to become a software developer, and was like, I should do the same.
All right. So then what year is this? Like 2010, 11?
Yeah, thereabout. Yeah.
Yeah. And so what do? You decide that you're going to go start applying for programming jobs? It's not a bad time to be a programmer.
So I was lucky enough to be a TA in that university in Cork, Ireland. And I knew some of the professors from the computer science department, and they allowed me to sit on some of their lectures. So I was able to kind of fill in some of the gaps in my education before I applied
Nice.
for a job.
Nice. So what's this first job that you now get with this added education in programming?
So there was a small company in Ireland. Probably you've never heard of it. It actually, the name changed. I don't need to mention the name of the company, but they were a SaaS company. They were providing a service to their clients, multi-tenant, and they were using mostly Java and Scala at the time.
Okay. And you were working on the entire stack, back end, front end, or
Mostly back end.
Back end. So back end Java, working on services, talking to databases.
Yeah.
Were they
microservices?
2012. So
that was the big microservices craze at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah. Everybody had to write a tiny little service. But you were, I mean, the cloud is around at this point. So you're deploying into the cloud. You're doing all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
What did you, how long were you at that company?
I think just under 2 years. Yeah.
2 years is pretty good though. So what did you find yourself gravitating to doing more back end than than anything else while you were there? You just that's where your head clicked.
Yeah, and to be honest, to this day, I still find front end stuff intimidating. There's just so much complexity, so much choice. What framework are you going to use? Are you going to use, you know, how are you going to bundle everything? There's just too many things to think about. Backend is simpler in comparison.
Dude, I stay away from the frameworks. I have a designer, and I've got a young kid, Kevin, who's on the show, who's really good. He just graduated and amazing at, like, I call it the programming side, getting things to work. So when Kevin and I are working on these projects, I always ask Kevin, get me a basic front end working. Let's try to do it with a minimal amount of, like, I don't want React. We've used stuff like Phaser, but let's just try to keep this as much JavaScript as we can. He gets it working. And then we'll sit together and clean it up. So at least I can maintain it. I get rid of all the asynchronous calls, all that stuff, you know. But that comes with time and knowing that you didn't want to deal with complex code, right? Kevin's at a point in his career where he was taught to get it to work, which, again, that's kind of what uni is, right? But now you got to maintain it, you know. And you don't have to maintain software in university. So you're not taught to code in a way that you can maintain it. What I have to teach them is, dude, you have to maintain this thing tomorrow. It's just not enough. And I think that's a big problem with front end.
I think minimalism, minimalism is big in the Go community. So probably that's bleeding into the other area of software you have to deal with, Bill, I'm guessing.
Dude, you'd love my JavaScript code. I got to show it to you, man. I'm writing Go code in JavaScript, man. I got it, like, returning errors and checking for nil. And dude, I laugh when I look at it. But you know what? It's clean. You can work with it. It's great.
That's funny you mention error handling because, that's something that people complain about when they're newcomers to Go. They're like, oh, why do I see if error not equal to nil all over the place? What is this? But that's what I tell people. Just give it a few months, give it a few weeks, maybe a few months, and let's have this discussion again. And most of the time people say, actually, this is error handling done right. And all the other languages, or most other languages, get it wrong. And this is error handling done right. Now I see the light.
The moment you have a bug and you're trying to track it down, yeah, you're like, okay, I get it, right? Which is what I'm trying to teach all the time. It's not about your time on Tuesday at 2:00 when it's easy. It's about when that bug's hitting production, how fast you can identify it, fix it, and And so you're right. I think the error handling is. I was writing code like that even in C# at some point, returning an integer and getting away from the try catch for the same reason.
I remember you really despised the try proposal a few years ago. I don't know if you do you remember that?
Of course, dude. I have it up on my blog post, man. And then I had to talk to Robert Griesemer like a month later at like GopherCon, and we didn't sit down, but we talked for maybe like a good 5-6 minutes. And we were both kind of laughing at each other about it a little bit. But yeah, that was an intense sort of month. But the Go team learned a lot from those early days of proposing things, because they learned, like, when they propose something, everybody's going to take it to like heart, that they're going to implement it.
Well, I don't know if you've seen, there's a new proposal kind of in the same vein. I think Ian Lance-Taylor opened it on GitHub. I think you should check it out, but it's already received my thumb down.
Oh, I haven't seen it, man. You're going to have to send me a link. It's funny, like I'm on the mailing list for the team that does the review of all of the, CLs and stuff. But I don't study it as much as I used to. Even some of the new proposals for the generics and the range iterators and stuff, like, I'm never going to use it. I'm never going to teach it. I played with it. I'm like, this is complex. It's hiding stuff. I don't need it, kind of stuff. So I sort of detach myself from it. But the only thing I ask the Go team, if anybody's listening, is just don't create two different ways of doing the same thing. Just don't do that, and I'll be okay. I just can't have it.
Do you have an example of doing two ways of doing things in Go?
There is a couple. There's at least one I can think off the top of my head. When they introduced any, it's small, but now you can have the empty interface, old syntax, or you can have the word any. So when that happened, I went into all of the code bases I was maintaining and swapped out interface curly bracket to any. But technically, there's two ways to do that. The OG of that, and it wasn't the compiler's fault if your goal was to keep the compiler simple, is that there's at least a half a dozen ways to declare a variable. Now, there's no way around it because to keep the compiler simple, they decided that a keyword had to show up in column 0, right? So if you want to declare a package level variable, you must use the keyword var because you're in column 0 at that point, but you're not inside of a function. So, okay, so that to me is the OG. So that's something I have to teach about consistency there. But I think most recently would be deciding that any was going to be used outside of generics. I was all for keeping it inside of just generic functions.
Yeah, I think some people lobby for any only being usable as a type constraint and not in the signature of println, for example.
Yeah, I was one of them, just because I didn't want the two. And at the end of the day, did it really matter? Everybody's using any, and it's a fast swap, right?
Yeah, I think it's hard to argue against any in terms of readability. It's so much easier to read than interface pair of empty braces.
Yeah, assuming that everybody did what I did, which is just navigate to it, and now you don't see, say, empty interface curly bracket anymore unless you're in some old standard. I never checked to see they swapped that out in the standard library.
They did,
but
yeah.
But it's a small example of, like, I wasn't a fan of the alias stuff they did either at the time, but nobody abused it, and so it hasn't been a problem.
Can I attempt to change your mind about iterators?
Talk to me, man.
Well, if you do care about performance, the classic way of exposing like a sequence of elements. Let's say you've got some abstraction, okay, and you want to have a method an exported method that gives you a sequence of elements. The classic approach would be just to return a slice from that method, okay? But if the cardinality is big, if you've got loads of elements to return, that slice is going to be really big, right? So you're bringing all this stuff in memory, even though you don't need it, or the caller might not need it. And I've actually found, like just this morning, I found an example where it actually leads to a vulnerability. Like it affects the security of the software because somebody could send a malicious request that would trigger a lot of heap allocation because a slice is used when an iterator would not have done that.
So I would make an argument to you there that the moment your argument is about performance, I would require that you have a benchmark showing me a significant difference in order to deal with the code that's going to be less readable and obvious. I'm not against performance matters. So if you can show me the real performance difference, I could live with less readability and obviousness because performance is important. But if you're telling, if I see that benchmark and we're talking even microseconds of difference, I'm like, dude, come on. Like, really? Like, you want to convolute the code for that? This is where I'm going to like stand on that hill.
That's fair. I mean, you have to draw the line somewhere. But in the example I'm thinking of, it was like, it was the difference between 16 megabyte to 16 bytes or something like that. There was like a 1 million factor or something between the two.
Okay, so I want to get back to your story. Even if there was, let's say it was 10 times more memory, pending, again, I would come back to you and say, if we did some load testing with some level of expected load and the memory constraint was still where we needed it and the performance was still where we needed it, do I really care about the 10 meg on that call every once in a while? That's all I'm saying, right? Again, it's that trade-off between performance and complexity. And when you don't have the performance, you must introduce the complexity and teach it.
That's true, but yeah. But I would say two things. First, what complexity are we talking about? The complexity is in the implementation. It doesn't have to escape the surface area of the exported API, not necessarily. You just have to understand how to use an iterator, let's say. But other than that, you don't see how it's implemented, not necessarily. You have to maintain it as the author of the library, that's true. But the onus is on you, not on your users. So you're kind of paying the price of that complexity in order to spare your users. And then my second point would be, you have to take into account malicious users, okay? If somebody knows the code and knows that by sending such malicious requests, he or she can make your memory consumption blow up, then you have to account for people like that in the wild.
No, absolutely. From the security and having any sort of API that accepts things that could cause, that's no question. You got to add the complexity there. I'm with you. I have to teach that. These APIs are dangerous because X, Y, and Z. So, but put that aside for a second. Let's have the first conversation you just had. I'm not going to live forever. So it's not about whether I can maintain that code. It's about whether somebody I don't know right now can maintain that code. When that day comes, right? And if I'm not there to be able to teach that human being, and this code is that sort of complex, then I am putting the code base, the project, everything also in a bad place. So again, I think it's this sort of being real honest with everybody around the balance of performance and complexity, and maintainability kind of falls into that. I'm not saying for what you just did, I wouldn't have agreed with you to use it, right? I'd have to study it. But that would be my argument coming at you originally is, do we really need it? Like, prove it to me.
Yeah, I think that's the crux of the problem. Where do you draw the line? Is this essential complexity? Is this unnecessary, accidental complexity? That's a tough conversation to have. I don't have a ready-made answer.
Well, I think it's not a tough conversation to have if you have the measuring stick. And one measuring stick is just that, running a CPU or memory profile and showing whether it is or isn't causing a performance problem or a security problem or that. There's a measuring stick there. You've already sort of explained, and I would assume you can show that there's a security problem not using this, in which case let's just use common sense, right? Like, thank goodness this feature functionality exists, and or maybe I can come up with another solution that's less complex that still works, but at least we can attempt to sort of solve it. That's all. One advantage I think I have is I'm not academically smart. I need the simplest solution all the time because my brain just can't handle anything usually beyond a certain level of complexity. So it's both a curse and a blessing. Because I'm going to argue dummy things down to the extent that I can.
Yeah, that's understandable. But then maybe the answer is leave a bit of guidance in the implementation comments. Say, we're using this specific data structure. You can read more about it over there, and we're using it for a good reason, and here's why, blah, 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 and benchmarks show that, blah, blah, blah.
Oh, yeah, for sure you need those comments in there. for sure, right? You need to do all those things. And you and I working together, these are the fun conversations for me when I'm on a project and we're doing a code review and we see something. The people that work with me, we all have sort of a mandate to convince each other of the things that we want to do. And my mandate is if I can't teach to it, we can't do it. Right?
That's fair.
If I don't feel comfortable teaching that in the classroom, we're not doing it.
You know what?
I think it's fun.
I'm actually refreshing my slides about iterators, so maybe I'll send them to you, and I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I'd love to see it too, because I've played with some of it, and my initial thought was, this is great, and I'm glad they're extending the language for people who want this stuff, because I want to see the language continue to be used and grow in the enterprise. But it will be shocking if I ever reach for this particular tool, because at least for what I'm doing, I haven't found a need for it. I'm not one of these Go people that say, well, since I don't need it, it shouldn't be in there. I think that's ridiculous. But if I do see this in a code base that I'm working on or maintaining, I know it's going to give me pause, and I know I'm going to have to ask that developer to prove to me that we need this over something else. Because at the end of the day, it does hide, right? It's simplicity is about hiding complexity, and readability is about I should say this way. Readability is about not hiding things, where simplicity is about hiding complexity. And there's a tough balance that you have to sort of find there. So if you're hiding complexity but it's still obvious what we're doing, I'm 100% for
it. This conversation reminds me of a book that I'm fond of, Philosophy of Software Design by John Osterhout. I don't know if you've picked it up.
I have it. I've been reading it again a second time for some stuff
great.
That I'm doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, these are the conversations I love having. If you work on my teams, we're having these conversations. And I always don't win, just because I'm like teaching, I don't always win. Like I have to compromise as much as anybody else, right? I just want to sleep at night knowing that I'm leaving a code base at a place that I feel comfortable that somebody else can come in and maintain, or at least understand the complexity decisions like this when it comes up. Plus, I think that if you can't defend your ideas at some level, then is it really the right thing to do? I'll give you another example. I was doing a code review with one of my team, and suddenly I saw the developer using an IO pipe for something, and my brain immediately went, whoa, what's going on here? It took me a good 5 minutes of figuring out what he was doing with this pipe, realized it was completely unnecessary, reached out to him, and I said, what are you doing? He goes, oh, I just like using pipes. And I'm like, dude, what are we doing here, man? And obviously I ripped it all out, right? But it's sort of, that's the stuff that really scares me. I like using pipes. This is how I do it. Yeah, I know, but that code's not maintainable.
I think we're on the same page.
People. Yeah.
I think we're on the same page. I always try to look for ways to simplify whatever I have. I wouldn't reach for iterators if there wasn't a good case for them. I think reason in everything,
Yeah, I'm really excited to see this stuff, and I hope in the presentation you're able to, based on this conversation, right, not just show people how to use it mechanically, because I've reviewed posts like that, right? But drive home real practical reasons when the iterator is better than a traditional for range with the slice there, right? Like one example that you've sort of shown. Then I think it becomes the home run, because now you're convincing me that there is a practical need for this, even though I haven't needed it since 2013. Right?
Yeah. And I think that's how anything should be taught. You should start with the problem, not the solution. Otherwise, you have a solution looking for a problem. And I know you train people you teach them Go. I have a 3-day course as well, and the way I approach it is, let's build a project, and then when we get stuck, when we're facing a problem, then we'll talk about, slices, let's say. Okay, so we're improving the project, and now we're missing some common abstraction between those two concrete types. So let's talk about interfaces. But let's not talk about interfaces before we actually know what they're useful for. Always start with the problem, then talk about the solution. And then people are hooked. People know where we're going with this.
I love that. That's the best, right? And every solution brings another problem to the table. But yeah, I love that. But look, as simple as the idea of this iterative function will allow us to stream data into the for loop, right? Just that alone is interesting when you have a large amount of data that you've got to iterate over.
Yeah.
Like right there alone, right? Because how many people love the IO package because you can take 32,000 bytes at a time or something, right? And iterate over. So I agree with you. The problem is how many real problems come up in the real world when you're iterating over something other than maybe a file or, I don't know. But I'm really excited. But these are the fun conversations, man. I could have these conversations sort of all day. They're cool. All right. I don't even know where we were before we went down this path here with Julien and I, but we were talking about that first job you had, I think, in Java, doing backend, and you were at that company for 2 years. So
yeah,
what sort of took you out of that company?
I have to say the complexity of the code base was gnawing at me. Couldn't deal with it. And Java, I used to love it, but now I kind of hate it. And I think I just had enough of the code base and the language. And at the time, some internal teams were developing, internal tools in Go. And I had heard of the language before, but I hadn't really given it a shot. I have to be honest, the first time I looked at the language, I didn't really like it. The absence of constructors really, that was something I didn't like. So it took a few false starts, but then I was like, okay, I'm quitting and I'm going to bet on this language. It looks great. And so I quit I quit my job. I decided to go to take a few months just to train myself, learn the language in depth. That's probably around that time that I picked up Go in action, and I watched your Ultimate Go course. I read everything I could about the language, good practices, idioms, etc. And then I went back to France, and I've been working. I've been self-employed ever since.
So you started doing some contract work at that point.
Yeah, that's it.
Nice. So that had to be then around 2015, 16.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you like being a contractor more than a full-time employee?
Yeah, I love it. I can't, I don't see myself ever going back to a salaried position. It would take either, a riveting job, something really interesting, or a lot of money, or maybe both. I love the leisure that being a contractor gives you. When you don't get gigs, you can work on your pet projects, you get time for research, you can, you don't even have to work, you can spend time with your cats. I love how much it gives you control, it gives you back control over your own time. That's what I love about it.
Okay, but how many weeks out of the year then do you feel like you need to see? I want to have this conversation. There's a sort of work mentality that is so different for people who live and grew up in Europe as opposed to the US. Like, even if I'm a contractor in the US, which technically I could almost argue I am, I want to work 52 weeks out of the year, man. idea that I'm not working puts me in a panic. You know, like how many weeks out of the year it's like good for you? Like 25, 30?
Yeah, I mean, the training is sufficiently lucrative that you can actually take some time off and work on side projects. And I don't know, the cost of living here is so much lower than in the States. I guess that's probably the main difference.
So, when I'm getting hired for training, right? And it used to be pre-COVID, I used to travel somewhere and be on site for 3 days. Now today it's more like maybe you're there a week or whatever it is, right? You can get anywhere from say 20 to 30,000 for that time. You pay your own expenses and stuff because it's just too complicated to submit that stuff. And everybody thinks, well, that's really great money. But there's two caveats to that. Say 20, or go in the middle, 25 grand. That one, you're not getting paid the next day. It could take as much as 90 days to get that cash, right? That's one thing. And then the other thing is that you're only making that 25 grand if you're on your feet working for that, say 3 to 5 days, right? So it's not sustainable long term. If you decide that, or you don't get the next training gig, there's no recurring sort of income. And I do that, but I do that behind a company where we also do contracting and consulting. And so money flow sort of balances out. So talk a little bit about that, because yeah, you might get the 25,000 for the week and it will last you a couple months, but it could take a while for you to get that money.
Yeah, that's true. But at the same time, Ardan Labs is a company. I'm on my own. It's just me. I have no employee or anything like that. So my expenses are pretty low in that respect. So I can afford not to have gigs for some time, And also, teaching is not my only occupation. Also do some bug bounty hunting and stuff like that. So I can juggle different types of activities depending on, what's hot or what's not.
Have you ever thought about the security and having that guaranteed sort of income as you get older? I'm 55, man, right? Like at some point, I started a company because I knew, well, one, I had too many kids I had to take care of. And I just didn't think being a salaried employee would allow me to do that. And so I've worked hard there. But I think what the company has done is also given me some security around income as I get, at some point I'm aging out. I'm aging out from a salary perspective. I'm aging out from having to compete against kids that are now 30 years younger than me, So I don't know how old you are, Julien, but I could calculate at this point. But do you have any thoughts or fears or worries or nothing around being 50 years old and still doing that? Talk a little bit about that.
All right, I'm 42, by the way. The last few years have been pretty great in terms of income. I guess I would reassess my situation if things started to go belly up. But for the time being, I mean, it's not on my mind, really. There's still a few years to go before I'm 55. Maybe I'll think differently when I'm your age.
I think that's great. But I go back to, I feel like there's this really fundamental difference, the way people who grew up in the US as opposed to Europe, I think about money, think about that work balance, think about all those sorts of things. And I find it fascinating. I'm kind of jealous. I grew up and continue to feel stressed about making money, earning enough money to support the kids and the family, and having enough money. I'm not looking to generate generational wealth at any level. That's crazy to me. But at least I die in peace knowing my wife doesn't have, this is a constant sort of thing that rumbles through my head all the time. So, business was actually low last year. Last year was 2024 was tough with all the layoffs in tech and all the budgets being frozen and sort of all of these things that were happening. I was in panic mode almost all last year, and I'm hoping that this is going to be a better year, right? It's just constantly on my mind, and maybe that's what drives me and makes me work as hard as I do. That sort of fear there, but I sometimes I get jealous. Like I wonder if I grew up in Europe, would I still have this sort of mentality?
Well, if it can be reassuring to you, I don't have kids yet, so I don't have the same preoccupations as you do. And the other thing I would say is you're welcome to move the entire operation, family and Ardan Labs to Europe. You'll be welcome.
Yeah, I could. I do have. I have very few things I want. Like I have everything I need, man. But I talk to Ali all the time, and I'm like, I would love to buy a property in Europe, maybe Portugal or something. I wouldn't be living there full time, but just to have something in Europe because I love Europe so much.
Fall back.
But I do yearn for the day where I feel like I have enough money to sustain a salary. Like the idea, invest this, a 5 to 6% interest a year. I have enough. I keep my lifestyle low enough where I think I could obtain that. But I talk to my friends in Europe all the time. Like in Berlin, somebody will work. Maybe they'll make close to 100,000 for the year, and then they'll, for whatever reason, they quit that job and then they live off of the I don't know what the word is, but the social, some percent of that salary is given back to them, and they'll do that. Like that's how they live their life, and they love that because it's like they work hard for a year, and then they take off for a year, and then they work hard for a year, and they take off for a year. I just find that fascinating, man. Mind-blowingly fascinating. These concepts.
Yeah, I mean, I think we live in different worlds. I keep reading about the amount of student debt in the US, for example, and that scares me. It's virtually not a problem in Europe. Like people, when I finished my studies, I had no debt. I was lucky enough not to have any debt. Of course, my parents paid for my accommodation during my studies, but the college itself is pretty much free, and that's great. I can't even conceive how U.S. citizens, start their life with such huge debt burden. I think it would make me hugely depressed.
So I have, at the time, I had 5 kids. I have 7 now when I remarried Ali. I had 3 of those kids went to uni. The first 3 the girls went to uni. And I told them that they were going to pay for their undergraduate. So they all ended up with like 20 grand. I wouldn't let it get beyond that, right? I made them pay for their undergraduate degree because if I didn't, I felt like they weren't going to take it seriously. I did pay for the graduate degrees for the 2 that sort of went. And they're still paying off those loans. And I feel like 20 grand is reasonable for them to sort of pay off. And I felt okay with that. But I think beyond that number, you're right. It's a productive. I look at debt as it's either productive or not productive, right? The mortgage is a productive debt. The car loan is a productive debt because you got to get to work, right? I'm not saying you buy the Maserati, you buy the Toyota, but you understand what I'm saying? So I think a school loan can be productive debt up to a certain amount. But if you're asking me, I wish it was more subsidized. I mean, I guess you have the choice of, in the U.S., going to a community college or going to Princeton, right? So I have a 17-year-old right now that's applying to uni. She's getting in. And even with the money that they're giving back, right now, the one school that I want her to go to is going to be like $30,000 a year, which includes dorm and everything. Right.
Yeah.
And her dad says he's going to pay it. So she won't end up with any of that sort of debt, but she's an anomaly with that sort of situation, you know. But you're right. It's that's interesting there too. What was the what was in all those years, right? Because you started that, let's say, in 16, 17. So let's just say over the last 7 years or so, what was some of the funnest projects you got to work on as a contractor?
Okay, so I get mostly short-term gigs. It's mostly security audits. Clients come to me and say, we've got this new service or this new product, and we'd like you to find all the web security vulnerabilities you can find. And that's usually pretty exciting. There's a lot of variety from one client to the next. And
how did you get that expertise to find web vulnerabilities? Where did that come in from?
So I started at that company I worked for in Ireland got me to become an ISO 27001. I can't even remember how it's pronounced, but I was an internal security auditor. I would go around and make sure that all the good security practices were respected, enforced, and that what sparked my interest in web security, I guess.
That has really evolved over the years. So how are you keeping up to date with changes in Chromium and mobile apps and all that sort of stuff?
Just like you keep up to date with the recent development in Go, there's a lot of online resources. And you can't really keep up. As you said, there's a lot going on, but there are also a lot of really great resources, learning resources online.
I imagine that you've built some tooling to help automate some basics in finding web vulnerabilities and stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And guess what my language of predilection for that is?
Go?
Yeah, it's great for that.
Is any of that stuff, have you open sourced any of that stuff, or you have to maintain it proprietary because of you generate revenue from it?
So none of those offensive security tools are open source at the moment, but I'm hoping to kind of clean up the API, and because it's like a command line tool interface, and I'm hoping to clean it up a bit and open source it at some stage. And you could think it's crazy because I derive some money from those tools. I should keep them for myself. But at the same time, a lot of security researchers open source their tools. So it would be my way of giving back to the community, I guess. Yeah.
I think it's great that there are companies putting time and money into this. But how many companies do you think are not spending time doing the work that you're doing in terms of finding these security holes and patching them up?
Are you asking about the tools themselves or the security work?
I guess since you're in that space, right? I guess I'm asking the work itself. Like, I've never actually sat down on, then again, I work on projects, I get them to a certain point and I hand them over a lot of times to the client who then has to maintain it moving forward. Right at this point in my career, but the thought of running a security audit and validating this, that, and that has never sort of, and everybody's going to think, Bill, what are you doing? But that I've never gotten to that stage in a project to even feel that way. I'm wondering how many companies are doing this work or not doing this work. You're a dangerous person, right? You see a website, your brain must start already looking for vulnerabilities and things.
I don't know how dangerous I am, but it's interesting to kind of applying reverse psychology to developers. You try to think. Oftentimes it's black box, so you're given like your URL, and you're like, okay, maybe a couple of credentials, and you're like, okay, you're let loose in this, but you don't know what they're using in the backend. You can kind of guess what they're using in the front end, but you have to think, okay, how can I abuse this functionality? And it's really exciting. And sometimes you struggle, you don't find anything of value for a while. But usually towards the end of the engagement, after spending some time with the system, you do find something, of high severity or maybe critical severity, and it's really exciting. It's really rewarding in its own right. I don't know how to
And they
describe
must
it.
thank you. And they must thank you. Like, thank God you're here, Julien, because, we didn't see that.
Yeah. I mean, it depends. Like, if it's in a paid engagement, it's some company coming to me and say, we'll pay you for, 7 days. And if you find nothing, we'll pay you whatever. That's much more comfortable. But if it's within the framework of a bug bounty program, it can be very frustrating. I don't know how familiar your audience is with bug bounty, but it's the Wild West.
Yeah, no, we've had people even on our contact us form reach out and say, I found this and that. Like, I think when it's unsolicited, it's definitely much harder.
Yeah, I mean,
solicited.
You shouldn't be receiving those unsolicited bug reports. A lot of people make the mistake of phrasing or wording their message in such a way that it could be interpreted as extortion. They're like, oh, I found something really, really critical on ardanlabs.com. I'm not going to tell you what it is. I'm not going to tell you how to fix it, but pay me and then I'll spill the beans. You shouldn't be doing that, okay?
No, I also imagine that you wouldn't spend time looking for stuff if that company didn't publish a bug bounties or program and
exactly.
requirements and the rewards, right? Yeah.
First of all, you'd be wasting your time. I mean, time is your most precious resource. You should be spending it on something that has more value than such activity. And also you expose yourself to legal repercussions. The company could actually go after you and say, who are you to go after our web assets? We never gave you the right to attack us or to probe our system or whatever.
Did you think at all that this is where your kind of career was going to go with the security stuff?
Yeah, I never had a master plan. I guess I just followed my interest. Bug bounty world is interesting, I think. Some of my, I don't know if I should call them friends. Some of them I've never met, but some of my acquaintances do that full time. And even the ones that are very successful actually struggle with mental health issues because they have to deal with companies that don't play by the rules they've written themselves. They try to find all kinds of reasons not to pay you, even when the vulnerability is critical. So it's a mad world.
Collections are tough, man. That's why there are companies that exist where they'll take 20% and you let them sort of hound. Collections are tough. We had talked about, in the last few minutes that we have here, I'd love for you to share a little bit of some of the projects that you have out there, open source, that one that you're excited about and maybe others could sort of leverage for their own purpose.
Yeah, so I guess I could talk about two. I guess my main open source project in Go is a CORS middleware library. I actually talked about this at GopherCon last year. And I guess your audience might think, okay, great, what's exciting about CORS? That's probably the most hated subject on the planet if you're a developer. But that was the idea behind this library. The idea is that it will guide you towards something that will work, or it will help you debug a configuration that's incorrect. So unfortunately, a lot of the libraries out there do little to no validation, and they let you build middleware, say, that are dysfunctional, that have no chance of ever working, but they don't tell you about that. You find out the hard way when you actually apply it and deploy your server, and nothing works. That's what I was trying to avoid with this library. So if you're looking for a dependable CORS middleware library, I think you should give it a shot.
CORS is one of those technologies that always feel like it's in your way. So you you take the door off the hinges with that type of stuff. Like I have before for dev work. And then finally I have to realize, dude, you got to put the door back on. So how do we sort of lock this down? But you can forget. The cores is one of those security things that it's so easy to just really open up large holes because it's in your way.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because there's so much misinformation and misunderstanding about the topic. Very briefly, in browsers, you get the same margin policy, which is a set of restrictions that applies between different origins. Okay, so let's say https://example.com and https://ardanlabs.com. There's some interactions that are not possible by default in browsers. And browsers do that to protect their users. And CORS is a mechanism for lifting those restrictions when you want to, in a controlled manner. But a lot of people don't realize that when you apply CORS, you might actually lift all of those restrictions and actually put your users in danger. Even some security professionals claim that CORS is actually a way to reinforce security, which is the opposite of what it does.
Yeah, you're opening the door. You're not closing it.
Yeah.
By any stretch. Yeah. What's the other project?
So the other project is more recent. It's more of an experiment than a dependable library, I suppose, but it's a collection of functions to work with Go iterators. So I'm not sure you'd be a client of this package, but
I don't know. I think I might change my mind after
maybe
I see your presentation.
Yeah.
Anyway, what is it called? I'm sorry.
It's called Iterators, like the beginning. ITERUTIL.
Iterators. Oh, that's interesting.
Kind of IOUTIL.
And that's available now for people to like experiment with too.
It's on my GitHub, yeah.
Nice. Well, I'll get that all in the show notes.
Great.
As well. It sounds like from a security perspective, you're seeing uses for that functionality, which kind of makes sense to me. Again, if you're able to sort of stream data into an iterator, which I hadn't thought about before, but just to use it for the sake of sort of using it again, we don't have to rehash that conversation, but it's kind of where my brain's going. So I'm excited to sort of see what you've got there. So that will be cool. I really appreciate you hanging out and telling your story. I think we had some fun technical conversations too, which I don't get to do on too many shows. So that was awesome. So I really appreciate your time today. And this is Julien and Bill Kennedy signing off from the Ardan Labs podcast. We hope to see everybody again real soon.